This is Talkin to America. I'm your host, Aaron Zellman. Our guest today is Richard Lucibella, publisher of SWAT magazine. Rich, it's a pleasure to have you here today.
Well, thank you, Aaron. Pleasure to be with you.
I have a couple questions for you. I suppose we ought to start with some basic things. For what does SWAT stand for?
As many of your listeners know, originally stood for Special Weapons and Tactics. It dates back actually to the late 60s when, and is credited probably to LAPD for having created the first SWAT team. And so in the context of the magazine was started in the late 70s and used that title because it focused on special weapons and tactics for law enforcement.
You talk about law enforcement, but is your magazine just geared towards those folks in law enforcement?
No, not at all. When we purchased it in 2001, SWAT was mostly a law enforcement title. That was not the direction that we wanted to take it. But we did have the title, and the title is obviously known in the firearms community. And so we moved it from a law enforcement-only title to more of a training and tactics, which cuts across employment lines and certainly includes your average American firearms owner.
The SWAT magazine is reaching out to a lot of different people within the firearms community, I suppose we could put it that way. But what does SWAT magazine do to reach out to people beyond the firearms community? Let's call it the freedom community at large.
Well, we can't really speak of a Second Amendment. We can't really defend a right to keep and bear arms without recognizing that that right's really within the matrix of all the other rights enumerated in the Bill of Rights. And I think it's a real mistake when sometimes we focus exclusively on the Second Amendment and are not aware of the constant encroachments to search and seizure in the Fourth Amendment, to states' rights in the 10th Amendment. So to that extent, we certainly try to alert our readers to potential dangers to all of the Bill of Rights. We have a column written by Claire Wolfe entitled Enemy at the Gate. It's a monthly column, and it is geared specifically toward the Bill of Rights, and that means all of them, including the Second.
Well, if you had to judge where we're at today in the war to preserve the right to protect one's life using a firearm, are we winning or losing?
That's a good question, and it's obviously a difficult question to answer, Aaron. I think on the state levels, we've made extraordinary gains. Concealed carry weapons laws, Castle Doctrine laws, and the like. We've just made some real gains. We're seeing laws being passed in various states which prohibit the government from confiscating weapons during emergencies, as we saw in New Orleans during Katrina. On the federal level, I mean, we did have the success of the sunset of the assault weapons ban. We didn't repeal it. It simply sunsetted. But beyond that, I don't think we're making any real strides on the federal level. And in fact, I think if anything, we're probably going backward as we see the nibbling of other rights within the Bill of Rights, as we see those shrinking on the federal level with Supreme Court decisions, with executive action like that. Once you lose ground in any of the Bill of Rights, it paves the way to lose ground in all of them. So I'd have to say the short answer is on the state level, I'm encouraged. On the federal level, not so much so.
Do you think that our backsliding on the federal level has anything to do with what they call the war on terror, or do you think it's an agenda for people who just want more power, that they're just control freaks?
Well, I think I need to respond to that very, very carefully, because it's very easy in a glib response for our listeners to say, oh, here's another conspiracy theorist. And the short answer is I think it has everything to do with the war on terror, our continued erosion of freedoms. I think it has everything to do with the war on drugs. I think it has everything to do with the fact that for some reason this country has been in a continual state of, quote, war since the 1960s. That takes absolutely nothing away from our sons and daughters and brothers and sisters that are in harm's way right now. As a personal aside, I support the war in Iraq, but that's not the issue. The issue is what's happening as a result on the domestic side. And on the domestic side, we're seeing a very dangerous jingoism amongst American citizens. We're We see too much knee-jerking of my country, right or wrong. You can support this war on terror and still oppose individual elements of that war. You can have, for instance, wiretapping with FISA courts without having to support wiretapping without warrant at all. You can oppose other tools in the war on terror without having to fear that you are anti-American. As concerns the second part of your question, I think, which is, are people just hungry for power? I think that's the life cycle of a bureaucracy, of any bureaucracy. Every single bureaucracy takes on a life of its own, and its life cycle is to grow itself through the need for more budgets. We see this in a number of federal agencies. As they have need for greater budgets, they create situations that get a lot of public attention to explain that they don't have enough money to do their job, or worse yet, they don't have the legal tools to get their job done. And we see that from agencies to legislators, unfortunately, just wanting to take on more power. The problem with it is that it's a zero-sum game. People don't realize that freedom really is a zero-sum game. There's a fixed quantity of freedom when we started this country. We knew what freedom was. Look at it as a fixed bowl of freedom in the society. The only way you can grant greater freedom, greater power to an agency of the state or the federal government is by giving up some of your freedom. We see that march. It's an inevitable march in many people's minds. I'm more optimistic than that, but it's a disturbing trend.
We talk about government agencies that want more power. You ran an article in SWAT magazine written by Claire Wolf about the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. And I suppose you were wondering before you ran the article if it's going to be a good idea or not for SWAT magazine. What kind of feedback have you received?
Well, the feedback on that particular piece has been quantitatively, overwhelmingly in favor of Claire's point of view. First of all, I want to congratulate you for the work you've done in Boot the BATFE campaign.
It really isn't just the work I've done. We have a lot of different people at JPFO that have pitched in and made all these things happen.
Well, credit due to all of them. But getting back to the specifics of that piece, I gave up a long time ago on looking at Claire's column before they're published in the magazine. I honestly do not vet her columns. I look at them fresh when you look at them, when they're published. I thought it was an outstanding expose. The response was overwhelmingly positive from the standpoint that she pointed up issues that many people don't know, that the ATF has no written standards for testing firearms. Many people don't realize how little transparency there is in an ATF proceeding against an individual. And that's another problem, that dovetails on your earlier questions at a national level. There is too little transparency in terms of interactions that we have with law enforcement. And we need to have greater transparency in order for freedom to thrive and flourish. I believe that she credited you and others with a push to have firearms in such litigation tested at the Aberdeen Proving Grounds. Was that your suggestion?
That might have been the fellow she was writing about, Len Savage, who was a firearms manufacturer, and he would know more about that than I do.